sorts of tea about what's going on in Washington, D.C., and what regulators and lawmakers are thinking and working on, and areas of opportunity and potential risk areas for your credit union. My name is Ann Petros. I'm NAFCU's Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, and I am joined today by Scott Reuter, who is Chief Appraiser and Director of Valuation at Freddie Mac. Now, Scott has a really important role in the housing finance industry, and we'll be picking his brain today about all things appraisals. So thank you, Scott, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, and for the invitation to join you today.
Yeah, of course. We're thrilled to have you. So let's just jump right in with a pretty hot topic right now. It's appraisal modernization. So, coming out of the pandemic where things had to shift in the appraisal world, what are some lessons that Freddie Mac and you learned from the pandemic? And how are you contemplating, adopting some of those lessons learned on a, permanent basis to improve and modernize the appraisal process?
Yeah, great question. So to the last point first, we're already beginning to implement things we learned during the pandemic. The one is the introduction of the desktop appraisal option. To the former, we learned a lot through the pandemic, and as awful as it was, there were a couple bright spots in terms of proving out that we still could do business, and the emerging tools and technology that really began to proliferate during the pandemic. Really gave us a lot of options. Gave us a lot of options to the traditional appraisal, to personal inspections of homes. There was obviously early in the pandemic, there was high sensitivity to contact, so we were looking for contactless options, and we learned a tremendous amount. So that facilitated a new appraisal type or appraisal option. And we also learned through that really the use of desktop and exterior only during the appraisal flexibilities during COVID didn't introduce any additional risk. So that was a bright spot, and we're certainly not done, but I think those two, really the emerging tools and technology, are the two big takeaways that we really learned through COVID.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's some perception that, like a desktop appraiser or appraisal or external only appraisal is less accurate, that, you need that human element to really ensure that the valuation is going to be on point. That's not what you've seen?
Yeah, well, I think it's combinations of a few things. So the human is still involved. So a desktop appraisal requires an appraiser. It's just changing the industry mindset to the way that appraisers collect the information. What you're hitting on, which I think is important, at least from a legacy perspective, is that appraiser inspecting or physically going into the property, typically for a traditional appraisal, all the time.
Right.
And appraisers, interestingly enough, through USPAP, our standards of professional appraisal practice, there's nothing in there that requires an inspection. It requires the appraiser to understand and be able to obtain information to inform them about that subject property as they develop an appraisal. So I think there is a mindset and a perception. We see, and a very similar thing with the use of trainees, which both enterprises encourage. And we're trying to get the industry to slowly adopt, the use of more trainees. There's no way we're going to bring in and kind of feed the supply chain, if you will, of appraisers if we can't bring on young trainees to become appraisers. But there still is that perception. I don't know how much perception meets reality, but in that regard. But there's the perception if I hire you to do the appraisal and you send a trainee just to collect the information and do part of it, but yet you're still signing, we need to get past the perception that somehow that's less than you doing everything soup to nuts.
Right.
And so I think it ties back to technology, in my view, in that how we collect the information is a part of the process. It's not the process.
Right.
So I think if we can, collectively get that kind of reinforce that messaging, that would help.
Yeah, certainly. That answers the question. Really, does the appraiser need to physically be inside the property to get a good understanding of what it's worth?
So let's dimension this out. And I think there are cases where that might be yes. So again, this is a giant test and learn really for
What might those cases be? Like a unique property, maybe?
Right. So
Okay.
a unique property, or if condition issues exist or are discovered, then we are now looking at, even though our systems may flag eligibility for a desktop, let's say, where an appraiser doesn't need to go through, there may be something learned the minute the property data collector goes on site that says, wait a minute, we didn't realize, fill in the blank, whether it's a serious condition issue with the property,
Right.
whether there's a site condition that really is problematic, or anything complex that's like, okay, this is beyond, we need to really get the appraiser out here. There's an escalation mechanism where we instantly can stop that, and then it can be upgraded to a full appraisal.
Okay, all right.
So,
So you've always got that option.
So we've got that option. We're working with our lender clients now to really ensure through a lot of test and learning that that's as seamless as it can be. We come out to your property. We really don't want to keep coming out like, I know we collected the property data last week, but they saw
We're coming back.
some other thing. So
Yeah.
now you have to take another morning off of work.
Yeah.
So we're working on ways to kind of collect all that information once, or try to flag or identify when that happens. But I think that really is a bit of a lens into the future, that we're really looking for creative and alternative ways to develop value.
Yeah. So obviously technology has advanced significantly since appraisals first started, being required for properties. And so how does, the adoption of new technologies and new tools have the potential to improve the appraisal process?
I think in a variety of ways. So I think they can help. They can help with what we're talking about, innovation and modernization. There are parts of the process that I think a tool, a data collector, a non-appraiser can help leverage their time to collect information and use technology to do that. I also think there's an advantage to putting technology in the hands of the appraiser. So a lot of appraisers, I'm an appraiser, so a lot of appraisers that I talk to, generally I can see the wall kind of coming down, and they're getting shut down when we talk about innovation, because most, in fairness, feel like that's appraisal elimination, not appraiser
it's gonna supplant
modernization.
their jobs.
Exactly. So I think the important part of the conversation that at least we can help drive and evangelize is that is really truly not the case. There's a lot of technology, again, that the appraisers can use to gain efficiency. So I think there's multiple uses, and I was asked recently what I'm excited about, and I think it is tools and tech. And I'm about the lowest tool and tech IQ guy around, but I love the fact that they really are helping enable a lot of different ways that we can modernize.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we look forward to seeing all of the improvements, as the industry kind of changes and adjusts to new technologies. Now, an effort that has been undertaken, jointly with Fannie Mae is an update to the Uniform Appraisal Data Set. And that's something that, credit unions rely on to share data with the GSEs and streamline their processes. So could you tell me a little bit about that update effort and, where things stand now in updating, the UAD and other appraisal, reporting forms?
So that's a game changer in my view. So the UAD, as you said, is the Uniform Appraisal Data Set. I think the good news for the industry is Fannie and Freddie are collaborating under the guidance of our regulator. The good news is that we're not creating another static form.
That is good news.
We're
Credit unions will be happy to hear.
We're creating a new data set or data standard that the industry can follow. So, and that's important for the reason you probably just reacted to, is that, we're working with a form now that was last updated 15 years ago that was originally designed for a typewriter. So, I mean, we've slowly been kind of moving along with a form. And it evolved and was great for what it was at the time. It was a need to standardize the best we could, rolling back the clock, you pick 15, 20, 25 years. But it's gotten to the point where not only are there probably better and more well-informed ways that we can develop an appraisal, but we can move away from just letting the form be the process. So and that's going to it's probably not an insignificant lift, particularly with appraisers of a certain age. You and I see each other at Appraisal Foundation meetings. They're very free to share their demographic statistics, which I don't challenge at all, that somewhere close to 70% of appraisers are 55 and older. And so I think that's a very real thing. And, it as we think about the future of the profession, along with, improving the way we can maybe develop the appraisal, it's important. So the data set is, we're in talking with our technology providers, we have an understanding that this is likely going to be dynamically delivered to the appraiser. So no longer, again, do you have to put the form or pull up a form on the screen and begin to fill out a form. You just begin to assemble characteristics and salient and key elements of the report, and that'll lead you down the road. The analogy that's talked about a lot is like a TurboTax kind of concept. You just get in and start kind of answering questions, and the whole report and report format's kind of already just kind of taking place. And that there's been talk that there will be a standardized output of some kind, but it won't be fully set and structured. I think that's so the credit unions, the GSEs, the banks, people who touch and consume a lot of appraisals, there will be some standard format to it, so it's not just like trying to read a whole brand new thing every time. But it will enable the use of third-party data collectors. It will enable a lot of modernization if you do something alternative to a traditional appraisal. And it will, more importantly, allow the appraiser to tell more of the story through discrete data elements than subjective free-form text. And that issue probably also goes over and touches onto a lot of the bias conversation, but I think that's also a big step. So,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it could be really a game changer, like you said.
I fully believe it.
Yeah. And when can credit unions anticipate this being completed and ready to use?
And you were going to ask that. They just updated the timeline. I think we're still a couple years out.
Okay.
But I will provide that for you in a link that you could share with your members.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And, just one other question. You mentioned that the average appraiser is, 55 or older, and this again gets into kind of the topic of bias, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But what can the industry do to attract younger people to become appraisers, to join the industry, to learn about, what it takes and the rewarding career that they could, achieve as an appraiser?
Yeah, it's a great question. We work on it literally all the time. We really do. And the current model, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is sort of the mentorship model.
Right.
And I'm not sure how well over time it's like translated to today. And talk about dimensions to a conversation. This is, there are, it's a hard industry to break into, trying to get the training, get a supervisor, appraiser. Many appraisers that I bumped into that are about my age all had a family member that were in the business, typically. The most interesting stories to me, parenthetically, are the appraisers I bump into that are about my age that haven't had a family member, because to me, that's an interesting story.
Unusual,
right?
Yeah.
My dad was an appraiser for many years. I thought that was so unique. And then the more appraisers I ran into, that's not unique at all. You either had a mother, a father, an aunt, an uncle, a relative, somebody, a good friend.
So it's sort of passed down.
It's kind of passed down.
Yeah.
And I think, this is Scott Reuter's opinion, I think that maybe that has also led to kind of how homogenous it is from a racial perspective, too. A lot of those same demographics were overwhelmingly white, were overwhelmingly male. So I think, and maybe that was just an offshoot of that. I don't know. But tying back to your question, what are we doing? We're doing a lot. So we message not only that we encourage trainees, and we're trying to work with our lenders and our banks to accept the use of trainees. Many do, many don't. The Freddie Mac is a core partner, along with Fannie Mae, the Appraisal Institute, and the National Urban League in the Appraisal Diversity Initiative. And that's big. That's big because it is not only aimed at trying to focus on bringing in the talent that you mentioned, but it's helping with the diversity concerns that we do have. So it's essentially a scholarship program to help young aspiring trainees get their qualifying education, and it's a jump start on that, essentially. And the program has been enhanced over the last couple of years to include not only all the qualifying education, there's a book and a tuition textbook package that goes with it. They get an HP 12C, which if you know one appraiser, you know they can't they can't get out of bed in the morning without their HP 12C. We've enhanced it with supporting state-specific education that they may need. Some states like California and Georgia come to mind. They have a lot of additional state-specific classes. We cover that. So it's a way to get, again, young and mid-career folks with some diversity, both gender and racial, into our profession. So we set a benchmark this year of I think, 200 scholarships, and we're already at 413.
Wow.
And we're really we're on a
fantastic.
tremendous trajectory. And also, I referenced the Test and Learn earlier. The ADI, the Appraisal Diversity Initiative, also feels like a test and learn because we're learning where our changing priorities are too. We thought for a while it was going to be continued awareness. The initiative basically started as an awareness campaign, like, hey, I don't think a lot of people outside the industry know about the industry. So that was good, and it was true. And then the Appraisal Institute kind of got on board. National Urban League has been a great partner. They have tremendous reach into communities of color. So we've kind of just been combining all these variables.
Right.
Now, where we would normally get 75, 80 folks at an event, we did an event a month or two back, we had 450 register. So I think and that's been a pattern. So I think we've quickly learned it's not getting folks to understand what it is and making them aware of the profession. Now we've got so many good candidates in the qualifying education track that we want to make sure that we're focusing kind of at the end of that assembly line, if you will.
Right, the next level.
Yes, getting them supervisor relationships and where they can actually be on the track to become a trainee, then to become an appraiser. So.
Well, it sounds like you have the process all figured out, or at least it's trending in the right direction.
For today, I like the latter. It is trending, yes.
That is positive. Well, let's shift to a different topic, and this is still sort of related to the modernization of the appraisal industry and process, but a topic that's been getting a good bit of attention, at least from the regulators, because there's a rulemaking effort on this front, and it's automated valuation models. And could you just explain, first of all, what those are and the benefits and risks of AVMs?
So AVMs have been around a while. I should say at the beginning, I start here, I'm not an expert on AVMs. We have an entire meta modeling econometric data and analytic team at Freddie Mac that this is their specialty.
That's a mouthful.
So, and they're smart, and they're headed by Michael Bradley at our company, and they do a tremendous job. So, but automated valuations and bringing some level of automation into this space happened in very baby steps years ago. It's become tremendously sophisticated and has been enhanced by just all the amount of data that's out there. So I think introducing AVMs and modeled valuation has a place, and I think it's like a lot of other things. This is, again, just my view. I don't think we can turn to automation and say solve all the problems where previously it had all been humans with no automation. I think there's likely some blend that really is sort of the higher ground.
The sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a sweet spot where the two begin to interact and interrelate.
Sure.
I think on lower risk loans, data can do a tremendous job. I mean, modeling can just, if there's homogeneous markets where there's a lot of data that actively trade, that have a lot of similarity, and I think we're both here in the DC area, if you go out the Dulles corridor, out towards the airport, and you get Reston, and you've got a lot of communities that have
Those developments where everything kind of looks the same, not in a bad way, but
not in a bad way, but you're right.
A little more predictable.
They have, exactly, developers would go in and put in thousands of townhomes. There'd be 2 or 3 different kind of, but I mean, by and large, a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
And the point being that models can just consume all that data. And they already see patterns between not only number of bedrooms, but basement and end units and garage. And they just crunch all this. Where an appraiser can do it, models do that very well. And if you combine that with a lower risk loan, where there's maybe lower, you're not pushing LTV limits, you're doing a variety of other things, that model can probably do a pretty good job in narrowing in on enough of the value to inform that risk decision, which is essentially what appraisals do. And again, we have to politely remind appraisers who that an appraisal helps inform a risk decision, period. And at Freddie Mac, we manage risk. So when we need an appraisal on a high risk, complex, heterogeneous, rural, unique, custom, whatever the scenario is, if we need an appraisal, if we need to be informed on a risk decision on that loan, we absolutely need an appraisal. We want the most qualified appraiser that we can get in that market. If it's one of the townhomes out the corridor, not that an appraiser can't do that, many appraisers can and do. It's just during busy times. You and I've looked at some of the capacity, the strain on appraiser capacity from time to time when volume's crazy. I don't know that we need to make that townhome buyer stand in a long line and wait for an appraisal when there's a lot of other data that can be utilized just to kind of.
So, I mean, just, an example is the past couple of years with the pandemic where you saw this huge refi boom, which has now subsided a good bit, but that I'm sure put a huge strain on the appraiser industry, and
absolutely.
The perfect time to rely a little more on these sorts of models, right?
That's exactly right, and we did with our ACE waiver appraisal waiver option, and that's informed by our HVE AVM, our in-house model, and it helped tremendously. You even look, and again, I've shared the data with you. You look at the strain on the capacity. Past 2 years is a great example, and and that was just the appraisal work. That was setting aside all the waivers that were happening that were assisting with the refinances. So, I don't even want to think what that line would look like if there was no other option.
Right.
And I just think it's a real thing. So that, just tying back to that kind of casts a whole shadow on modernization and innovation, in my view, is what we currently have is really not fully sustainable long term. It undulates like this business always does. We see about the same 40,000 names currently of appraisers that do work for the GSEs that submit work to the UCDP portal. And again, during busy times, that poor capacity line gets crushed. And so anyway, to me, it helps inform that we do need other options. If we think of products and product options kind of on a spectrum, on a continuum from low risk to high risk. So if up before until we had waivers, we had one option, which was the full 1004 Form 70 traditional appraisal. Now we have two. We at Freddie Mac introduced an ACE plus PDR, and I think we're going to build from automation up. What can automation help kind of? Where is it pure automation? Where is it informed automation? Where is it the appraiser and automation?
Right,
and then
in the middle,
kind of shading all the way up to the need for a full appraisal. And there'll be a variety of things that will inform that. But I think that's the way we think about risk, and I think that's, again, pretty much fully in our mind when we think about innovation.
Yeah, that sliding scale seems appropriate and not too far off from the way that credit unions and other lenders evaluate risk internally and do their underwriting and all of that. So seems to align with just the broader housing finance industry.
Well, it's good to hear, yeah.
So the FHFA, the banking regulators, including the NCUA, are undergoing a rulemaking. This is a Dodd-Frank requirement to establish certain quality control standards for AVMs. Now, I'm not asking you to talk about the specifics of that rulemaking, and regulators certainly aren't giving up that information.
You have an appraiser in the room. You don't have them.
Do you think that once this rulemaking does come out, whatever may be in that these standards could potentially provide some much needed, for lack of a better word, standardization in the industry, and lead to more accurate models down the line?
I agree. So to your point, so as an appraiser, I'll answer that that analytic question, only to say that I believe that any level of standardization transparency and visibility is not going to be bad. And I think that's up to and including the AVM space. So none of that to me is a problem at all. I know we have experts that are kind of working on it as an industry, and I would have to think it's a good thing. I know enough about AVMs and models to know that, they can be built, the algorithms can be built certain ways. So I think understanding how all that works, I just think is prudent and responsible, and I think that level of standardization is going to go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, the devil's always in the details, so we have to see what is in the rulemaking and what, if any, requirements, that would put on to lenders to sort of double check, all of the boxes in the process, because I could imagine our credit union members being potentially frustrated by whatever additional requirements or burden may be placed on them. But
yeah, that's fair.
I don't want to
speculate on
yeah,
what,
exactly.
Right,
speculate on potential problem areas of the rule that has yet to come out, but we're anticipating it this year, so we'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So the final topic that I want to chat with you about today, and this is probably the most high-profile issue, and that's appraisal bias. So, recently the administration, as sort of a whole of government approach, and put out this PAVE report, and it outlines some historical patterns of systemic bias in the residential property valuation process. Could you, briefly kind of run through some of the primary findings of the report, as well as how appraisal bias generally can impact communities of color, and the future generations as well?
I'll say a couple of things. Firstly, a big nod to the White House and the entire regulatory group that worked on that. I don't think there's a more important issue we need to be focusing on. So I think it needs to be in the discussion, and good for them. I think too, we looked at it at Freddie Mac. We looked at sections and subsections as they related to things that the GSEs could do in terms of an action plan. And really a large part of PAVE, as I read it, was an action plan. So we took away from, I think there were maybe 5 main sections, we took away some things, at least from appraisal and valuation, that we could work on. And a lot of the good news is the things we already are working on. So we can look at, not only from a policy perspective, things we can do. We got a whole policy team which is working on that, through QC and appraiser quality monitoring. There's a lot we can do right now, and we've stood up a team at Freddie Mac to begin to look at not just appraisals, because we look at and consume a lot of appraisals, but we're also dimensioning that one step further to look at appraiser specific behavior over a lot of appraisals. So that can also tell a story. If we see any patterns of similarity, dissimilarities, they relate to what their peers are doing, what our data show, as well as just any consistency in their report. So that's important. And ways to detect if any biased words, any wording in the report may potentially lead to a biased outcome in the report. So we have these routines already with appraisers that exhibit a variety of different behaviors. This is just an extra dimension to that. So I think the appraiser quality monitoring piece, and then we're working to enhance a lot of our front-end tools for our clients to also enhance our undervaluation flag as an example of just, hey, lender, here's you're consuming all this stuff. We return a lot of messaging to them. This is one where we have long had an undervaluation rule. We've just worked really hard to begin to perfect it and give them an idea where maybe they need to look as we kind of partner with our lenders to maybe help kind of bring into focus a little bit of their QC routines as they help look at these reports as well. Biases, it's tricky because it's not going to be, I don't think, at least on the valuation side, it's going to be in one spot. Right. I think that's why the PAVE report was as thick as it was, is because they didn't say, well, look, we brought all these bright minds together and here it is right here.
Yeah, it comes in many forms.
It could come in many forms. That's exactly right. And tying back to updating the UAD, it's also very hard to sort of find that. We talked about mysteries before we went in here. If you're kind of sleuthing this, it's hard to get a signal on that if you're looking at an antiquated form that is mostly free-form text. It's going to be, and only asks for the appraiser to reconcile to the three best or most similar comps. So there are things appraisers can do now that they have not really been held to task to do. A bad or dated form's the wrong reason not to manufacture a credible appraisal. Not to say most appraisers aren't credible, they are. A lot of appraisers do a great job. But we just don't, there's nowhere in the construct of a form to say, what 30 comps did you look at to select these 3 or 4 or 6? What did you consider? So I think there's a broader story that the appraisers can and should be telling. An appraisal's an opinion, but it's a supported opinion. And I think the current construct does very little to demand a lot of that, show me your work, show me your support. And I think, again, this new data set is going to allow not only to take the subjectivity, minimize it, so I don't have to tell a lot of the story of appraising your home in words. I can tell it in discrete data elements.
Right.
And then a lot of our messaging, even now with the old form, is going to tie to pride of ownership, desirable, so crime-ridden, terms that really have no business today being in a report.
Right.
That's somebody's subjective opinion. So we're going to be focusing on a lot of that. So hopefully that addressed your question on PAVE. And
Yeah, it does. And I mean, while there may be some value to like a narrative description of the community in which, a home is located, what is the purpose of, for example, describing the ethnic makeup of that community, and how does that...
Well, that's exactly right.
...provide value to the buyer?
And how does that differ in your eyes than in my eyes?
Right. Yeah.
So I had a go around with an appraiser recently at a conference on the word desirable. And they were ready to die on the hill with desirable. I mean, I've just, and not to digress, but they were fishing for a synonym. Like, okay, you don't like desirable, what do you like? I said, no, this isn't like a game where we're just trying to find a better word. So then we went into a hypothetical community, and I said, why would you use that term? Pick an area, and she named an area.
Sure.
Why is it? Well, I mean, here in D.C., for example, well, you walk to the park, you can walk to the metro, you can do. I said,
so
then say that.
Yeah.
You don't need to say it's desirable because you can do all these things, and I'm going to identify all those things as desirable. Say
exactly.
You can walk to the metro.
A lot of
I walked
things.
Here from the metro.
Yeah.
You can walk to the park. You can do. So again, that is what I think. I hope. I hope all those discrete data elements in that new data set and data standard are going to do is just to help the appraiser kind of tie and tell the story as much as they can with data. To your first comment, absolutely, you're going to have cases where you're going to need to elaborate with some narrative. You have a home that has a kind of a complex or shared easement in the drive, and there's something, I may want to elaborate on that.
Yeah.
And say it's a shared drive, but there's a maintenance agreement, and it's whatever the appraiser wants to draw attention to, they absolutely can. But now instead of being free-form text and data, we hope that we kind of take that scale and really just are able
tip
to
it in the other direction.
Suppress exactly and tip it the other way.
Yeah, and another interesting comment you made about the number of comps. Should that requirement change? I mean, it's currently set at 3, right? But we've been talking about how technology can help to incorporate so much more data than a human may be able to crunch on their own. So maybe that's an opportunity as well there that can again help to eliminate the subjectivity and potential for bias.
Oh, without a doubt. And so I don't know. We got 2 very bright teams from Fannie and Freddie working on the UAD initiative. But one thing it will enable wherever they come out as a requirement, if I'm back in the field doing appraisals and it's been a while, I would absolutely, if I'm here in Fairfax, I'm pulling a long list of sales. And from broad similarity down to, a little bit more definitive similarity, and say, this was my set. This was my data set that I looked at for this period of time, these characteristics, this size, these features, and then began to winnow down to a subset of data which I thought was most comparable. to your point, maybe long-windedly, I think that story is important to the reader. Not just, I have to magically take the leap of faith that you did all of that and you landed here versus a worse answer.
Exactly.
So anyway, yeah, so the new reporting format and the data will allow that. We're also playing around with other ways that we can do a report. All that's kind of in our little pilot and test and learn, nothing that we can talk about. But I think there's a lot of things appraisers can do. And I think it's even ties a little bit back to your AVM question, where you're just taking all this data, you're just putting it in the appraiser's hands and saying, here's what we can do now. And absolutely advantage that.
Yeah, and just leveraging all the data that you have at your fingertips, literally, and then just moving in the direction of transparency is
right
and cannot be a bad thing.
Right. So we even learned. So I'll throw the appraisers a bone. The appraisers struggle in some regard, and they actually do a lot of great things. And we saw with a majority of the appraisals that we reviewed during COVID, we talked about what we learned during the pandemic. We had a minimum report qualifications standards for doing what was required to do a COVID appraisal. I would say more than not, we saw appraisers exceed that because they're sitting at their desk. We allowed them to make certain assumptions during COVID, but there's a whole different way to develop work now from a desktop. But at the time, they were showing a behavior that they were going in because of all that data and doing more. Dropping in aerial photo, things they didn't need to do.
Yeah.
We're going through the reports, looking at them, go, wow, they were just choosing to augment the appraisal with a lot more data. And I think that's great. And I think it gave us a kind of a peek down the road to say, okay, this isn't a bridge too far. This is maybe something that even an older demographic of appraisers can kind of get used to doing because they've been interacting with all this data. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, that's great to hear. And I'm sure, the industry will naturally move in that direction over time. They just maybe need a little nudge.
Yes.
But, related to the PAVE report, which, quoted pretty substantially from Freddie Mac's own analysis and recent report on appraisal valuation gaps. There was a quote that I'll read to you that appraisal values are more likely to fall below the contracted sale price of a home in census tracts where a higher share of Black and Latino households are located, resulting in an appraisal gap. So you described a little bit about how Freddie Mac is focused on addressing these undervaluations, but could you elaborate, more on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me personally and to our company, that's troubling. And I think the good news, at least from a Freddie Mac perspective, is we are fully dedicated to continuing the research. So again, I don't think it's one research study and you're done. I think you continue to work. One of the things, and I know I'm very partial because I'm very close to it, but one of the things I'm very proud that Freddie's doing is they're taking a very disciplined approach to all this research in this space. And I don't know that that's shared widely. I think a lot of groups, a lot of people, I think their heart's in the right spot, but this is a very emotional issue. And I'm glad we're not sort of jumping to a conclusion and then backfilling with data. We're truly just looking to where we get a signal, and we got a signal. So now I think the important work is the next step. So we put out a second research note, which was very heavy modeling, and now we're going to continue. Where do we see a signal? Where can we continue to look? Are appraisers the problem, or are the appraisers just reporting the problem? Or is it a combination of a variety of things, which is more likely where it's at? I don't know but we are committed to really continue to work and ensure that we're moving towards trying to get those answers. Back to the aforementioned scrutiny on the appraisers, the quality monitoring and the oversight, as well as what we can learn from these markets. So,
Yeah, there's probably not an easy answer as far as the source of the bias, so to speak, but it's something that is ingrained in our society and is systemic in a lot of ways. So it's hard to identify it and root it out sometimes. But we talked a little bit about attracting broader pool of appraisers, younger appraisers, more diverse appraisers, that is certainly a step in the right direction, and trying to eliminate, this bias. If you got an appraiser that looks and talks like you, maybe they're a lot less likely to use some of those potentially, subjective or even inflammatory, words in the report. But what are some other ways in which the industry can move in the direction to help eliminate this? Is it ethics training for appraisers, or what else can be done?
Potentially. I mean, I think this is an area where A, I'm not the expert, but B, I think we keep a wide open landscape, because I think we need to consider it all, right? So either ethics or fair housing training. I think diversifying the profession, clearly. I think, working to ensure that when we do need an appraisal, we have a standard that is more identifying property and property characteristics through discrete data elements versus free-form text. And wherever we can, we begin to continue to work, because I honestly think, and I think the complexity of the problem lies in the fact that it's not one thing. And so I don't know exactly, sitting here with you today, which one is going to have more significance. Somebody asked me recently, as an example, because we've been out extolling the virtues of ADI, the Appraisal Diversity Initiative, and you talk about a labor of love. It's a project that, for our Freddie Mac team, for the Fannie Mae team, who I love dearly, our Appraisal Institute partners in the National Urban League, for at least those first three that are kind of the hands-on partners. Urban League does a tremendous job, but they're kind of just a tremendous silent partner. Everybody involved in that's got day jobs, so to speak. I mean, we put in long hours, evenings, weekends, travel to these workshop events. That's not a pat on the back. It's just to say we are fully dedicated to it because we feel it's so important. It's a long way to a prelude to somebody said, well, you think actually, bringing on, how many appraisers are you going to potentially bring on, and 400 this year and a few hundred, that's actually going to change things. I said, I don't know. But I can tell you that we're going to need to grow and feed the line with appraisers at some level. And without this effort, without an eye towards diversifying the profession, what do you think the likely outcome is going to be if we lean on the existing model? So we need to just continue to take incremental steps, I think, across the spectrum. So diversity, leveling the playing field from a reporting perspective, enhancing our tools, driving the message to appraisers and appraiser level monitoring, I think, is absolutely key. And maybe there's a role, and this is just pure speculation, maybe there is a role for the emerging tools and tech, right? So it's been speculation, and this isn't from Freddie Mac per se, but and it's a question, is separating the inspection from the appraiser also a way to distance some potential bias? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm an appraiser. I don't think appraisers wake up every day and think of ways they can exert bias and harm.
I'm sure that's not the case.
No. But I think we need to be thoughtful about all this. If you're consuming it as a piece of information, is it? So I don't know.
Yeah. So would that be a separate role entirely, like someone whose only job is to come in and inspect and then report that information to the appraiser, or that's just what you were describing before, like on a sliding scale? Sometimes maybe, that's appropriate. Other
Probably
times
more like
not.
the latter. And I think we're seeing, to jump in, but I think we're starting to see that emerge with some of our desktop appraisals and the PDR, which is the Property Data Report, which we're currently combining as an offering with our ACE waiver to help inform the waiver. It's it's a labor force. It can be an appraiser, but it can also be someone who's just trained. And I left my phone in the other room, but I always like to lift up my phone. But yours is right there. But our smartphones now, there's a lot that we can enable and do and put in the palm of our hand with our phones.
Certainly, yeah.
And I don't need to be that qualified to sweep a room with my phone, and it's painting and capturing all the details and downloading it, not only into collecting it and giving me a floor plan. Some of these that are emerging can give you a 3D scan and that dollhouse image where you can, I can sit at my desk in McLean and with my finger, twirl a house around 360 degrees from the attic down or basement
tour,
up.
Right.
I feel like I've been in the house.
Yeah.
Now for every, back to our earlier example, for every loan and appraisal, assignment type, that won't fit. But for a lot, it will. for a lot, it's a quantum leap from what you would normally get if you're doing a drive-by or something. That's a
Sure.
great piece of information.
Yeah.
So,
So why not do it?
so why not do it?
All right, last question, and I'll let
Okay.
you escape the hot seat.
Okay, awesome.
And it ties into what you were just talking about. Maybe there's a role, and a larger role for technology to play in the appraisal process. And so when you think about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we're talking really crunching a lot of data here, how could that help to minimize or completely eliminate appraisal bias? I mean, again, it's a multi-prong approach, but if this is one of those prongs, then maybe we can really move the needle in that direction at a much faster pace.
Yeah, that's exciting. So, sci-fi is probably my least interesting genre, but if you talk in this regard, it gets interesting, because I think from what I've heard that a lot of the emerging AI, machine learning, and a lot of these advances, you can go through a home and we've begun to see some demos where it can capture barcodes off of the HVAC and appliances. And so all of a sudden it's not just pictures, it's a tour, it's a floor plan, it's 3D scan. Now it's collecting information that is helpful to the appraiser to identify from not only the core kind of elements of the home with wiring and furnace and plumbing and air, but also through appliances that might stay. There's a big difference between, kind of a low-end fridge and a built-in Sub-Zero or something. So all of a sudden now you can have all this information. So in my view, that's one of the biggest exciting things too, is because then that can either help inform or take away from the appraiser all that subjectivity in rating the condition or quality of a property, which we currently require them to do. And you may be able to leverage a lot of this technology to help inform that. Right, so one of the tricky things for appraisers now is when they go in and have to rate either quality or condition of a home, the GSEs, and we're trying to think of a better way to do it. I don't know how to do it. We have very absolute definitions on how to rate quality from C1 to C6 based on a variety of things. And the problem is when you get in a home of any age, you generally get components which have all been updated at different times. So brand new furnace, older hot water heater, and throughout every element in the house. So the trickiest assignment to me back when I was in the field was taking all that and rolling it up into one condition rating, which is what the GSEs want for that house.
Right.
How much is deferred? How much is just kind of old? How much really needs to be replaced now? So, so anyway, that's a way to say that I think a lot of that technology, in my view, could help do that. Now, there are people smarter than me take it another step, and you can take that into another sphere where all of a sudden that's beginning to inform whatever value decisions, influence of various things or whatever.
Right.
I really can't speak to that, but I think it's all exciting. I'd be sitting in the front row at somebody's class about it, trying to learn more if it really becomes a thing where we can absolutely use it and introduce it and be able to advantage it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very interesting prospect, and again, something to look forward to.
I know, it's exciting. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining
Thank
me
you.
on
No,
this
this was great.
episode.
Thank you.
And that does it for this episode of the CUPP. Stay tuned for more exciting discussions from Washington, D.C. Until next time.